Hello, everybody. Oh, Sheila. Hello, darling. How are you? Happy to see you, Sheila.
Oh, well, Robina, great to see you too. I'm fine, thank you. Thank you for coming.
Oh, total pleasure. Happy to be here. I wish I were in New York, but there you go.
Yes, I wish you were too.
I know the way the world is now. It's so weird.
Just bizarre.
Yes. So, Mary Ellen. Hello, sweetheart. Okay, you people.
I would love to introduce you again, Venerable Robina, if that's okay.
Go ahead.
So as many of you probably already know, Venerable Robina, she's been a great friend of Shanti Deva Center. And we're so grateful she's come back this week to teach for us. Her way of teaching the Buddha Dharma has benefited me so much, and I know for countless others as well. For those of you who might not know some of her stats, is she's worked full-time for FPMT's organization since her ordination in the late 70s. She's been the editorial director for Wisdom Publications, the editor of Mandala magazine, and also the executive director of the Liberation Prison Project. And her work with prisoners have been featured in the documentary films Chasing Buddha and Key to Freedom. She's been a touring teacher of Buddhism, physically in the past, but now online, internationally, she's been teaching since we've been shut down. She's been teaching all over the world, Australia, Europe, and all over the US, different centers. So hats off to you for teaching in all these different time zones. It's great. We're so grateful. So I don't need to say much more. So I'll pass it to you, or I can share the prayers, whatever you'd like.
Do that. We'll just have one called the refuge prayer. We'll do the little refuge prayer.
Great.
And I'll explain what we're doing. Nice to see. Yes. Yeah, we start, as we all know, probably the Tibetans, the Lamas talk about setting our motivation, always stating our motivation before we do anything. So traditionally that's expressed as in this prayer. And if you think about it, a prayer is, a bunch of words sounding nice with a nice tune sometimes. Well, this too here, we'll sing it in Tibetan. But the English meaning, it's important to understand what the thoughts are. We'll probably talk about that today. This is really the essence of what the Buddhist is saying, that all our thoughts count. Every thought counts, we'll talk about that. So these thoughts, the first two lines are for those of us who figure we are already Buddhists, who identify with being Buddhists. So it's just reiterating our reliance on the Buddha, our refuge, in other words, And then the second two lines are where we state the motivation. So we might just say, what's our purpose? Stating our purpose for being together. Well, it's the grandest, most long-term purpose is so that, as it says, by this by the positive karmic seeds that we plant in our mind from listening to these teachings, may, in the end, may they ripen as my Buddhahood, so I can be a benefit to others. I mean, that's the essence of it, So we'll sing it in Tibetan. Sangye charang toke tognam la jangcho baru dagni kyap suchi dagi chonyen gi personam ki drola penche sangye drupa shok sangye charang toke tognam la jangcho baru dagni kyap suchi dagi chonyen gi personam ki drola penche sangye drupa shok sangye charang toke tognam la jangcho baru dagni kyap suchi dagi chonyen gi personam ki drola penchir sangye drupa shok. Thank you, Teresa. Okay, so this less drama, more dharma. So what does that mean? I think, I don't know, I think, with the Buddha's view of the mind, all the things we read about in the Buddhist teachings of what we're capable of what we will be like, which is good to look forward to. It's good to know. But if we look at ourselves in comparison with that, we can all see whether we've been practicing for a day or 40 years, I think we can see that there's a long way to go. So I think, even if we just talk about meditation like we did this morning, to actually have concentration meditation, it sounds very nice and lots of us do it, but to actually accomplish it, like we said this morning, even just to be prepared to go into the conditions, where you really, an ideal conditions to get it. Already you'd be a highly advanced person, I remember interviewing, and you must know Venerable Rene. I don't know if he comes to New York. Does he come to New York? Does he teach in New York? Rene, the Swiss monk. You've never invited him? Oh, he's so special. You really must. Mary Ellen in California. She's here. She'll tell you all about him. He's based in California. He's a Swiss monk, and he's a student of the Lamas for and he's been a meditator, like a professional meditator, really, 45 years. And from the time he first met the Lamas, that was his path. He became a monk. He was doing teachings. He lived in a land. He was teaching, living in the Land of Monastery in France. And then eventually he started doing his long retreats, and I interviewed him in Mandala magazine in 95 when I was the editor, and he'd done a 2.5-year retreat. Since before that, he'd done a 2.5-year retreat in our center in Spain, this wonderful place up in the Sierra Nevada, beyond, a couple of hours out of past Granada. And it's a beautiful place. It was just like Tibet. His Holiness blessed it in 1982. Yeah, in 1982, and he called it Ursel Ling, the place of clear light. And that's where Lama Ursel was born, Lama Yeshe's reincarnation. So he said it even reminded him of Tibet. It's such a perfect place for meditating. So Venerable Rene, I interviewed him about this retreat. It was 2.5 years he did in his attempt to get single-pointed concentration. And even that, and so as we discussed this morning, it's like it's described in terms of 9 stages of cultivation. It's all there in the text. This amazing technique, these genius Indian yogis and scholars, well before the Buddha, created. They're the ones who first really, as His Holiness says, they're the ones more than 3,000 years ago who began the investigation to the nature of self, I mean, I often joke and say that we probably thought it was Freud 100 years ago. No, it was these Indians 3,000 years ago. Unbelievable. They're the ones who created this amazing technique and really began to investigate the mind internally. So he said he may be, after the 2.5 years, he said, just touched upon the 5th of the 9 stages. Now, that's 2.5 years, every single day, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 hours a day, in strict retreat, in strict discipline, all day, every day. And that was the perfect condition. That's the ideal condition. But even then, he said, he knew that he couldn't get further in that particular condition, because once your mind gets more subtle, your mind gets very sensitive, So even that, so he said, but also he said, there was no way I could even have begun to do that retreat if I hadn't already had other practices. In other words, you can't just walk off into the mountains like tomorrow. You have to have so many qualities already. He said he'd been a monk for several years. He said he knew he wouldn't have been qualified if he hadn't been a monk, living in vows, doing lots of purification, lots of practice, listening to the teachings, and even giving the teachings. All of this was the preliminary, the things that primed his mind to be able to go up to this place and have the discipline for a minimum of 2.5 years. And he's been doing retreats off and on for 40 years now. So, I mean, just to begin to get, what I'm getting at is to begin to accomplish what the Buddha is telling us we all can accomplish. In ordinary materialist terms, it just seems so high. And we can get so kind of disillusioned if we think of it like that. But I think another side of it is, I think if we can take some courage from it and know, yes, it's a long-term thing. And if we're we sort of like Buddhism, we know perfectly well Buddha talks about past lives and future lives, and maybe that's a bit weird for some of us, but the really important one is not to have false expectations, I mean, they all say until we've really got some decent, serious concentration, we're not going to really begin to get anywhere. And then even one Lama said, until we've realized emptiness, we can't get that far. So it's not to be discouraged. I think it's just to show how long-term the job is, meaning the extent to which Buddha is saying we can develop our minds when we read about that. But I think it's so important to get courage from this. And that's what I think Lama Yeshe was just amazing. Some of you might know him, some of you might not. Lama Ursel's reincarnation, he was the Lama that Ursel is reincarnation of. Lama Yeshe passed away in 1980. I always forget the year. I was there, but I can't think of it. 82, 83. So the thing is, Lama first met Westerners something like in the mid-60s, early 70s, really in the early 70s when he came to Kathmandu, when he was in Kathmandu. It's that was right at the time when all the hippies, Western hippies were going to Kathmandu looking for drugs and enlightenment together. Don't ask me why we conflate drugs and enlightenment. It's the weirdest idea in the world. Anyway, that was what happened. But they met the Lamas, So Lama Yeshe, I met him a couple of years later. I met him it doesn't matter, a few years later in Australia. And all I know is when I heard Lama Zopa teaching, Lama Zopa taught a 1-month intensive course, and then Lama Yeshe would come in the evenings. And I heard Lama Zopa talk, and I didn't know what he's talking about. I understood his words, but this whole packaging, this intensive Tibetan Buddhist packaging of all Buddhist philosophy and psychology and metaphysics and psychology all in one big package, you know, this extensive presentation of the stages of the path as they talk. I mean, it was, you know, I had this vague idea, and I suppose we have these cliched ideas of what Buddhism is. And I kept saying to myself, where's the Buddhism in this? I didn't know what I was talking about, because we do have, and I was talking about this morning, even about meditation, we have these cliched ideas of what we think it is and what we think we can accomplish. So then every now and again, Lama would come along and teach at the nighttime. And all I know is when he talked, I kind of sighed with relief, because he had this enormous, incredible ability to make it sound possible. He kind of got the essence of the teachings, and we need all aspects. I mean, you need to hear someone play the violin magnificently just to show you it's possible. But you also need to really do the hard grind of getting into all the theories and studying and practicing for years and years. And and if you get too involved in that part, you can easily lose the plot and forget about the results, you know. But Lama Yeshe had this, and I think it's so important for us. And that's what Lama Yeshe had the skill to do, to make it feel possible, you know. So now with Lama, from the very beginning, and actually we were talking about this in, we were discussing, you know, the Discovering Buddhism module all about Tantra, the more advanced teachings in Buddhism in the Santa Fe Center, which is where I am now. And we're discussing the whole tantric approach, and it's really very helpful. And that's what Lama was so amazing. He could see, you know, the tantric approach is more advanced insofar as when you really are familiar with your mind and you're really advanced, you've gone through all the stages of practice, you've gotten some renunciation, you control your body and your speech, you've got some concentration, you really understand the mind intimately and well using Buddha's model of the mind, you really can distinguish between all the delusions and the nonsense and the chaos and your virtues and your goodness. And that's the key job of being a Buddhist, which I'll talk about. And not only that, you've got bodhicitta and you've got a realization of emptiness. When you're really advanced, then the tantric approach is the one that's most advanced, most sophisticated, most skillful. But Lama had the way of presenting it that it seemed easiest, in a sense. It seemed like it seemed kind of palatable and understandable. And the whole idea is that when you're more stable in your mind, when you are more stable, less drama, more dharma, you learn to be more joyful. I mean, it sounds so corny. How to learn to be joyful, you know, I better get more cake, better get another boyfriend. That's what we think. No. By working on your mind, and this is what often you don't notice that in the teachings, because it always often sounds so forbidding in the teachings. But the point of the practice is when you learn to control your mind and learn to understand your mind more, you can afford to be more joyful. You will be able to be more joyful, more happy, more fulfilled, more content. I mean, it sounds so delicious and simple. But Lama somehow had the way, when he met all these hippies, all these, you know, and he could see all the self-pity and the misery and the dramas and the depression and the anger and the confusion and the attachment. And then we come along and try to be good Buddhists, and you get all very fundamentalist with yourself, and you put yourself down and you criticize yourself, and I can't meditate, I'm so hopeless, I'm no good. Lama somehow had ability to kind of just attempt to, he said, we know how to be miserable. We're good at being miserable. You know, and this is the irony of ego, and I really can get that when you study the Buddhist teachings. The irony of ego is we are more addicted to misery. We believe more in our bad qualities than in our good, you know. So it's like we can't begin to be happy. We can't begin to be kind of positive if we can't recognize our good qualities. And Lama had this ability just to show us, you know, to help us find the way to be more happy, enjoy things more, to enjoy something more, you know, to enjoy. But this is not easy. I mean, it's possible, but so this is why, so let's look at the Buddhist approach to how you get happy. I mean, to keep it that simple, that's really what Buddhism is all about. One way of framing all of Buddhist teachings is different in different terms. One of them is it really is a system of ethics, but also too, it is simply and fundamentally a method, an approach to how to stop suffering and get happy. So Buddha's, first of all, in the Four Noble Truths, we know that Buddha's got he posits different levels of suffering, but let's just look at the simplest level, you know. When the bad things happen, it's suffering, and when the good things happen is, you know, what we call happiness. So when we begin to understand our mind, and that really is the unique approach in Buddhism, when we begin to see the difference, you know, okay, I got a bit distracted there in my own mind. So it is a method for getting happy and stopping suffering. Now that really sounds delicious. It seems almost too simple. I would love to be more happy, and I would love not to be so much suffering. It's true. So let's look at the mind, because that's the real point. For the Buddha, that's the real point. And this is a bit shocking. I remember Lama Zopa said, I heard him say recently, that it's the vast majority of all humans on this planet including all the intelligent ones, including all the stupid ones, all the intelligent ones, the vast majority of all humans on this planet have absolutely no idea that what goes on in their mind plays any role at all in their lives. Now, that sounds a bit shocking. It sounds almost impossible to believe, you know. What that means is, I mean, when we understand if we become a famous violinist or a mathematician, we know exactly that everything that goes on in our mind is why we're a good violinist, because we've got all the theories right, or a brilliant mathematician. But when it comes to happiness and suffering, we do not know that. And this is really fascinating. So this is the key Buddhist point. So you see, our trouble is because when we hear happiness and when we hear suffering, because we are so addicted, and this is Buddha's view of what samsara means, but it's all what we're so familiar with, that happiness is out there. I mean, quite literally. If someone says, tell me about your happiness, Robina, I will describe the meal I had. I will describe the kind boyfriend. I will describe the beautiful weather. Because we're so believing in our bones, and this is what Buddha means by being in samsara, this misconception that happiness is the result of what goes on out there, and that suffering the same. And if you see I'm in tears and I'm suffering, please tell me about your suffering, Robina. I will describe in detail my mean boyfriend. Why? Because in my mind, he is not only the cause of the suffering, he's almost like as if he's the suffering. And that's because we're so addicted to the external world. And this is not moralistic. This is a practical issue, you know. So Buddha's expertise, Buddha's view is, you know, we sort of know it in the world that what goes on in our mind plays a role, but not really, because we know I'm miserable. Okay, this is what Buddha means. I know I'm depressed, let's say. I know I'm angry. Anger is in my mind. I know that. Anger is my mind. I know that. But because I'm so convinced that the boyfriend is the cause of it, then I think of it as external. And in other words, I don't realize, and this is the point Lama Zopa was making, I don't realize that the anger itself, the role it plays. I think the boyfriend is the cause of the misery and the cause of the anger. So the anger is like this kind of natural consequence to some terrible thing that's out there. Analyze this carefully, and it's quite a subtle point, you know. It's true. I know I'm angry. I know I'm anxious. I know I'm depressed. But our analysis, and I'm not being rude, but this is our analysis in the West, because we're so into the brain and the chemicals and DNA and the behavior and the mother and the father, all of this, we're very good at looking at the external causes of things. And Buddha's not arguing that the external world doesn't play a role. He just says we're missing the main thing, the mind itself. And this is really hard for us to see. We hear the words, they're not that complicated. But so what is in the mind then, as far as the Buddha is concerned, what goes on in our mind, which means our thoughts and feelings and emotions, they are the main players in our suffering and happiness. So in other words, a way to put that is that what goes on in our mind is a series of interpretations, that anger is an interpretation. This seems too shocking. Anger is an interpretation of something. Anger, attachment, they're interpretations. The cake is on the plate. I've got the habit of attachment. It's an interpretation of something. Attachment and anger, these are the two of these three poisons Buddha talks about, these primordially deep states of mind. But basically they're rooted in being conceptual stories. And this is a biggest surprise to us because they're so habitual and they're so eventually physical. We experience the physical result of these states of mind. So attachment is a viewpoint, you know. I'm sure we just talked about this morning. I think it was somewhere else. I forget now. But the mind, as Lama Yeshe talks about this in his Mahamudra book. I mentioned it this morning in the meditation class. This is a wonderful book, came out last year from Wisdom. It's Mahamudra, this marvelous method for realizing emptiness. And it's just the two modes of meditation. It's a really perfect description of the two modes of meditation, but the particular way of using these modes of meditation, concentration and insight, into how to realize emptiness. But the first one, where we learn to concentrate, he talks, the mind is the thing we function, is what we concentrate on. So that's the real Buddhist expertise, the way the mind is and the contents of the mind and how it functions. So the mind, as Lama Yeshe said, and this is what they say in the teachings, the way we cognize things, the mind cognizes. So the mind is like the subject. And how it sees things out there, the way these things out there, like the cake on the plate or the ugly boyfriend who's just rejected me, those objects out there in the world, the way Lama Zopa puts it, they appear back to me. Those things out there appear back to me in the mirror of my mind according to how the mirror is. So if the mirror is dirty with attachment, dirty with anger, that's the aspect the boyfriend will take. That's the aspect the cake will take. Now, we don't think our mind, in that sense, we don't think our mind plays any role. We think that the cake that appears back to us through the lenses or the mirror of our attachment, we don't realize our mind is doing anything. We don't think our mind is configuring it in a certain way. That's what Lama Zopa means. We just think the cake is delicious. We just think the cake in itself is delicious. This is the main mistake the Buddha says that we do that keeps us locked in misery, locked in our dramas. And this is why the whole job of being a Buddhist, as Lama Yeshe puts it, learning to be our own therapist. It's not a joke. It's deadly serious. That means we have to become familiar with the conceptual stories in our mind. The emotional ones are anger, attachment, depression, jealousy, anxiety, arrogance, low self-esteem, you name them. We're intimately familiar with them. They're actually conceptual stories. They're opinions, they're viewpoints that we have about ourselves or something or someone else, you know. So beginning to realize that our mind interprets the cake, interprets the event, interprets Mr. Trump. I mean, let's say we don't like Mr. Trump. Example. I mean, you might not. I'm having no opinion here. Let's just say you don't like a person called Mr. Trump. You know, it's very hard for us to distinguish between Mr. Trump and our view of Mr. Trump. That's the real point, you know. That's the real point. That's what Buddha's expertise is. Beginning to distinguish between, you know, one way of saying the whole of Buddhism is in terms of its how to stop ignorance and how to get wisdom, how to be in touch with reality. What Buddha means by reality, and there's different levels of reality. The ultimate reality, of course, is emptiness, but there are levels and levels in which things exist. And Buddha's deal is that we are completely living in la-la land in relation to what exists, because we're seeing everything through the lenses of what's in our mind. And so if we see things through the lenses of the virtuous states of mind, we're relatively speaking in touch with reality. Go for it, baby. There's a sense of interdependence there. But if we have anger and attachment and jealousy or resentment, you name it, and we see Mr. Trump, for example, Mr. Trump, or whoever it might be, doesn't matter. Give me an example of a person we don't like, or an example of a person we think is bad. Some people think he's bad, some people think he's good. We know that. Let's say you're one of the ones who thinks he's bad. So this is the point. We don't think that our view, our series of concepts actually factor in the way Mr. Trump appears to us. We think Mr. Trump is what we think. Now, the same, you can see it clearly with the people who are fanatically his fans. Everybody's like this according to who the person is. Just an example. The people who adore Mr. Trump. You know, you see interviews of people. They don't care what he does. They don't care what he says. They think he's fantastic. So they don't realize that they've got opinions in their mind that distort Mr. Trump to their eyes. This is the point that Buddha's making, and this is the point that Lama Zopa is making. We believe in what we see. This is the whole point of being a Buddhist. Learning, you know, to understand. I mean, we say the word attachment and anger and jealousy. These are the most common words on the planet. And then, you know, we don't even think of them seriously in psychology. You don't go to your therapist and say, oh, I got a bit anxious today. She'll laugh at you. You don't say, I've got the 3 poisons. She'll laugh at you. You've got to have a serious thing called OCD or ADHD or something. We have these serious names. I'm not being sarcastic here. But these are the mental illnesses, and I'm not joking, the Buddha's been talking about for 2,500 years. They're called attachment, anger. And when we understand Buddha's analysis of them, they go to incredibly sophisticated, deep degree. You know, it's not just some superficial kind of feeling. It's very fascinating. And they are viewpoints. This is the amazing point about Buddhist psychology. You know, we've got the sensory consciousness and we've got mental consciousness. The sensory consciousness is just these dumb animals, with respect to animals, just this bare bones cognition of shape and color and sound. The rest is just a story made up by our mind. You know, when I just hear that trumpet note and I go, wow, Miles Davis. You know, yeah, it wasn't to you. It was earlier today in the Santa Fe court. That's right, this morning. So we talked about that. So, you know, when I hear that note, that trumpet sound, my ear consciousness, all it's capable of cognizing, you go into this when you study Buddhist Buddhist epistemology. No, the epistemological model of the mind in Buddhism. You learn to know how these cognitive states function. It's super fascinating, I tell you. So ear consciousness can only cognize sound. Eye consciousness can only cognize shape and color. But when I look at this object, I will say immediately, there is a really well-designed thermos. Now, where does that come from? My eye consciousness does not know that. My ear consciousness does not know that's Miles Davis, or trumpet for that matter. They're very bare bones in their capacity for cognition. And I tell you, this is one of the major things to learn to know about in Buddhist psychology to inform the way we experience the world. It's very, very necessary. We mix the sensory with the mental. The mental is where the workshop is, as Lama Zopa says. That's where the workshop is. That's where the thoughts and feelings and emotions and dramas and fears and all the rubbish and all the goodness are, the happiness, the suffering. That's the mental consciousness. The sensory are really limited in their capacity, the sensory consciousnesses, the ear, the eye, the nose. And the consciousness is not the ear itself, the eye itself. That's just, the consciousness is not physical, and it works through the means of these physical pieces, you know. But we give them way much more power. As Lama Geshe says, we make the body the boss. So even if we understand this, we're on track with understanding Buddhist psychology, the way we suffer and the way we get happy. This is amazingly helpful. So what that means is, you know, so when I see that shape and color, eyes can see shape and color. So when I look on the YouTube interview with Mr. Trump, or the, whatever it is you're looking at on your iPad, and whatever it is, and you see that shape and color, and we know it's Mr. Trump. Even that is a concept in the mind, just shape and color there. And then if he appears ugly to you, two people, we all know very well, two people can look at the same person. One will adore Mr. Trump and one will loathe Mr. Trump. There's not much in between. We've noticed that, isn't it? And each of us, this is the point, each of us totally believes that what's appearing to our eyes has got nothing to do with us. That's the point that Lama Zopa is making, that we don't think our mind plays any role. We just think that is Mr. Trump. But the person, when they speak, the one who doesn't like him will reel out these concepts, about this person. And the person who adores him will have a completely opposite view and will describe him as a special person. I mean, we understand what I'm saying, but it's got nothing to do with the eyes. But we see an ugly person. We see a nice person. It's all the stories in our minds. And that informs the way Mr. Trump will appear back to us in the mirror of our mind. Now, the whole world is like this. We experience the entire world like this. And that's what Lama Zopa means when we mostly don't know that our mind plays a role. We just think that cake is delicious. That ex-boyfriend is ugly. Mr. Trump is ugly, whatever the opinion is. And the opinions that we mostly are running with, this is the Buddhist view. If we take all these, the Buddhist model of the mind, they talk about 84,000 distinct neurotic states of mind. It's hilarious, 84,000. There's a entire map of the mind. But they also assume to these three. We all know from the Buddhist teachings, the three poisons. Sounds so cute. Well, these three toxic emotions. Well, there's a hierarchical relationship between them. The root delusion, I know you've been studying the mind with Gus lately, which is fantastic. But the root ridiculous state of mind, forget even that one. That's this misconception about the very nature of self. Forget that, that's even quite subtle. But on the basis of that one, we have the two main ones that run most of the world, and all the others are branches of these two. And that's called attachment and aversion. Bare bones, attachment and aversion. I mean, as I said, you go to your therapist, say, I've got some attachment, they just won't listen to you. It's not a mental illness. And come when you've got a mental illness, please. But for the Buddha, these are the main mental illnesses. I'm not joking. The word they use in Buddhist psychology is affliction. But it's a very arcane word. You don't talk about having an affliction. We just don't talk like that. That's Sanskrit and Tibetan. That's fine. It's a valid word. An affliction is a problem. What kind of problem? Well, it's a mental affliction, isn't it? Buddha's deal is the mental afflictions, not the knees and the eyes. But another word for affliction is illness. But as soon as we say the word mental illness, we get shocked. I mean, we are horrified to think I've got a mental illness. But this is Buddha's point. And I'm just using this word purposely because it's so shocking. And basically he says we're all mentally ill as long as we've got attachment, aversion, and all the other 83,997 loads of nonsense. So the main one day to day, this is what's so interesting, the main one that runs our lives. And if you're in samsara, honey, whether you're an ant, a monkey, or a human, this is common to all of us until we're highly realized. And it goes to incredibly subtle degrees. So this attachment is this, it's so primordial, it's so deep in us, it's so ancient that it's like at the level of an assumption. It's just this assumption, and it's very needy and hungry. It's not happy. It's not a happy state of mind, that's for sure. It's needy and hungry. It's an assumption that I must get what I want every second. It's like frantic. And this attachment causes us to desperately need to get what I want every second, which means the right smell, the right taste, the right sound, the right word, the right feeling every second. And the millisecond we don't get the right word, the right taste, the right smell, the right sound, then that's what aversion is. Right there, they're running 1,000 times a day, but because they're fairly quiet, we're not having mental breakdown, we don't notice them, you know. That's why we've got to get some concentration meditation. So we begin to notice what's going on in our mind beyond the surface, you know. We don't even notice our mind now until the body is involved. And this is what's so powerful. And Swami Yeshe said to make the body the boss. We only know we're having a problem with anger when you're shouting. You only know you've got a problem with depression when you're inert in bed and cannot get out of bed, because we don't notice what's happening in our mind until the body is involved. This shows how we're addicted to the physical, you know. We've got to notice our mind sooner than that. This is the key to success, I promise you. Forget about getting concentration, forgetting about realizing emptiness. Just to begin to notice what's going on in the mind beneath the surface. That's what concentration meditation will help us do. You know, let's just relax. Like we said this morning, let's just relax. We need to become conscious of what on earth is going on in this crazy mind of ours. And the energy, the Buddhist model, it's very structured the way the mind works. You know, as I said, attachment is the main one. It's this constant assumption. Its most deep energy is dissatisfaction. And that can be really serious with some of us. Lama Zopa said it's the main suffering in the West. Constantly not feeling you're enough. I haven't got enough. I'm not enough. Whatever I do, not enough. What I get, not enough. How much I taste, not enough. How much food I get, not enough. How much my boyfriend tells me, not enough. It's like a default mode of never enough. And this is the consequence, Buddha would say, of course, from past lives of practicing attachment. Because attachment is this misconception deep in the bones of our being, you know. So dissatisfaction. So that means you're hankering after something. We don't even know what we're hankering for most of the time. We just want to feel good, you know. So we assume feeling good comes from a cake or a drink or sitting down or standing up or lying down or doing this or going there. We keep changing the thing we do in the hope that it'll trigger a pleasant feeling. But when we've got such dissatisfaction, we can see this. No matter what we do, the dissatisfaction doesn't go away, you know. So we've got to train our minds. So the thing is, anyway, attachment is this primordial assumption that I must get what I want all the time. And it sounds very brutal. It sounds very self-centered, and it is. That's the point. It is. That's the Buddha's point. That's why we suffer so much. And it's so subtle most of the time. And then the second it doesn't get what it wants, there's slightly wrong noise. The husband doesn't listen to you properly. The traffic doesn't go the way you like. The red light comes instead of the green. You know, the smallest thing that happens, and this is 1,000 times a day. This is why life is so fraught, because we're bumping into all these things all the time. And attachment wants to think something to be a certain way. And then when it's not, we can't cope with that thing, so we bump up against it. That's called aversion. When it's strong, it's called anger. When it's mild, it's called irritation, annoyed, frustrated, upset. We don't pay attention to that. We just think it's normal world. No, they're mild versions of anger. And they build up. Nothing goes astray in the mind. And then one day or one night or one day, there's the straw that breaks the camel's back, and you start screaming and yelling, you know. So we've got to learn to pay attention to what on earth is going on in this crazy mind of ours. And even in the West, we say we'll get like 1,000 thoughts a second. Well, Buddha agrees, you know. And this is the tough job. As for controlling your mind, that's another whole level of reality, just to get to see what's there. And it's going to be a while before we control it all, because it's true, isn't it? We really do believe these thoughts we have no power over them. You don't think, oh, what will I think now? You don't think, oh, I think I might get depressed. You think, oh, I won't get angry now. No, it just seems that we're being pulled by a bull by the horns, aren't we? No, bull by the nose. It's like that, isn't it? Because the thoughts are so ancient in us, because we haven't ever controlled them, and we don't have techniques like that in our culture. This is Buddha's expertise, I tell you. It's amazing. But it'll take a while to control them all. So don't hold your breath. But this is why the first step, this is why it's hard. We can't stand these thoughts, can we? We wish they would go away. Even when a small bad thing happens and the mind is completely thrown into chaos and the anxiety arises and the anger and the hurt and the resentment, and you can't stop. You know, you're doing the dishes and you're doing your jobs. No one can see that what you're thinking, but the mind's never stopping. We know this. So this is why, because we can't stand it, because you see, attachment isn't getting what it wants even in our own mind. So we wish, the main thing we have is we wish it would go away. We can't bear the pain of it. But it's not going to go overnight. It can't. It's not possible. So what are you going to do with it? Well, first you have to be aware of it. And that's where I mentioned this morning. In the texts, when they talk about single-pointed concentration, and it's described in terms of 9 stages of cultivation. Well, you know, they say in the text that the sign of success at the first of the 9 stages is that you think you're getting worse. But you're not getting worse, as Pavanka Rinpoche says. You're just noticing your thoughts. And that's what happens when anybody becomes a Buddhist and you start to become more conscious, more aware of your thoughts, which is the Buddhist point. Then we all feel we must be getting worse. We all feel, I can't believe this anger I'm having. It's been there all the time, but we haven't paid attention. So the key thing is we can eventually control it. All the techniques are there, so you can have some confidence from that. There are techniques. It is possible. That's what Buddha is telling us. And that should give us confidence. But the first level is we have to be aware, and as much as we can begin to catch them. But the thing is, we then have to be brave and stop resisting them, because that's what aversion is. So if everything's going lovely, and your mind's all kind of perky and happy, oh, it's nice, a delicious cake, and the boyfriend's being lovely, and we're all perky and happy, right? We're not noticing our mind then either. But the moment the thing starts to go wrong, that's when you bump, you know, the space between attachment and aversion is when the bad thing happens. So then everything kind of explodes, you know. That's what we have to learn, to be aware of them and not be scared about mind, not be afraid of it, not panic. That's what anger is. We have aversion. Aversion, when you see your crazy thoughts, you have aversion for them. You're like angry with your thoughts. And this is the big skill we have to learn. The more we see all the thoughts in there, and I like to think of them as my roommates, my crazy thoughts, you know, join the universe, people. Then our feeling is, oh my God, I can hear myself angry. Oh my God, I'm anxious. Oh my God, look at that jealousy. And then we get angry with the anger, and we get angry with the jealousy, and we get angry with so we keep piling on more negative roommates until your mind's so crowded you can't think. So we've got to stop doing that. That's what we've got to stop doing. That's where we can change the interpretation of what we're seeing in our mind. Yes, there is anger there. Yes, there's jealousy. Yes, there's resentment. Yes, there's anxiety. Yes, there's fear. They're very ancient habits. So the intelligence in us, the good roommates, the intelligence and the wisdom and the kindness, they've got to do the interpreting instead of the anger and the attachment, adding to the troubles. And that's the big shift we have to make. Stop wishing that it'll go away. It's going to be a while, but you can start to reconfigure how you interpret what is in your mind. So instead of just using anger to interpret yourself and put yourself down for being angry, you use wisdom. Well, yes, Robina, it's true that I was just angry then. You're talking to yourself, you know, and anger is harmful. I can see how it hurts me, but it's an old habit, Robina. Give it a break. Give yourself a break. It's all right. You'll be fine. You're sort of like you're being your own friend, calming you down. We've got to learn to do that. That's when a big shift starts to happen. Instead of just endlessly caught up in knots and I'm hearing your mind, can't stand, I'm so bad, I shouldn't be this way, I'm blah, 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 we just go crazy, you know. We've got to learn, otherwise got to learn to live with your crazy roommates, and I'm not joking. We have to learn to live with the crazy thoughts. And as soon as you learn to, I mean, just using that analogy is perfect. If you've got some neighbors who never stop making a noise, you know you get so angry with them. And the more you get angry, the more you suffer. It is so clear. But if you're brave enough and you know the neighbors aren't going to leave and you can't leave at this moment, you're stuck with these neighbors, you're stuck with these roommates, then by changing your interpretation of the roommates, you will start to feel less miserable. So the roommates I'm talking about are your own internal roommates. But we have to begin to hear this cognitive, we have to hear this process, we have to hear this discursive process. We have to be conscious of it and not freak out and keep ourselves steady. There's their old habits. So this is the point I'm getting at. Let's say your habit is to be angry, and there you are practicing, working hard on your mind, and you're noticing more and more clearly this anger that's always in your mind at different levels, but now you're noticing it more. So, you've got to learn to be glad that you're seeing it. It's another approach. You've got to learn to be glad. This is very shocking. I mean, extreme example I use is a friend of mine is a serious meditator, 30, 40 years and 3-year, 4 retreats. You'd imagine he'd be a saint by now. But at some point he was out of his brain, he said, with incredible anger and rage and arrogance. He really felt uncontrolled. He was really kind of very distressed, practicing for years. And he went to Rinpoche, Lama Zopa, and Rinpoche laughed and laughed and said, fantastic. The dirt has to come out. The dirt has to come out. The dirt has to come out. And this is really serious point. When you go to the gym, you go to feel good with your muscles. You come home after the first day with muscles you didn't know you had and pain you've never had before, but you know it is a good sign. It's such a simple example. We've got to learn to feel this way, but it's hard because the instinct is just to beat ourselves as soon as we hear the anger, to put ourselves down automatically. We do it automatically. That's the conversation in our head that we have to change, because it's good. So that, in other words, there's a major difference between the old habit of anger popping up out of the blue seemingly and consciously buying into the angry story. So say, Sheila's my friend and I go to her and I'm really distressed and angry, crazy with my boyfriend, and she's my friend and I trust her and I'm telling her about my anger. I'm in tears even. But my reason for telling Sheila is for her to be a sounding board for me, to help me see my anger and work on it. Then that's not being angry. That is me working with anger. I might even be shouting and crying, but there's a big, big difference. The reason I'm doing this is so I can get some more clarity about my mind. That's not quote unquote being angry. Now, if I go to Sheila and then I'm raging on about the boyfriend and he's an evil, he's this, and she's saying, yes, I know, Robina, how can you put up with him? That's being angry. There's a big difference. And we have to see the difference in our mind. So the anger will come, the depression will come, the anxiety comes, and this is so hard. But we've got to not, what I'm getting at is you don't buy into the story. You're kind of watching the crazy, angry thoughts and not identifying yourself with them. This is what we have to learn to do. This is a major shift in our mind when we can do this. And then, because we're getting more awareness, we're cultivating this huge awareness of all the intricacies of our own thoughts, then we don't need to vomit it all out onto somebody else. Normally, if you're really feeling distressed and you meet a friend in the street, how are you, Robina? I'll just pour out my heart, won't I? Because I need someone to help me hold my crazy ideas and my unhappy feelings. We have no control. We wear our hearts on our sleeve, absolutely. But if you're really practicing being your own friend, your own therapist, as Lama puts it. And I'm not joking, it sounds so cute, but it's profound. Hearing your thoughts, knowing how to navigate them, not freaking out, not resisting them, knowing their old habits and attempting to, work with it all, then you will have some self-respect and you might meet your friend and she'll say, how are you, Robina? I'll say, I'm really well. How are you, sweetheart? They will never know you have a problem. Not because you're being secretive, it's because you're working on your own mind. This is really what daily practice is, I promise you. Daily practice isn't just sitting there with your eyes closed, having a nice experience. That's just the beginning. The real work is day to day, navigating all this stuff in our own head, but you have to become familiar with it. And you have to know how to label it accurately. You have to know how to label it. We have to know, is it a delusion or is it a virtue? And they're the two main things in our mind. Some are valid states of mind, like love, intelligence, kindness, compassion, forgiveness. They're virtuous states of mind. We need to grow them. And the other rubbish is to diminish, lessen them. But we have to distinguish between the two. We put them all together like a big soup, And we tend to identify ourselves with the rubbish ones. That's the irony of ego. The irony of ego is we don't think we're one big, fat, important person. We think they're a terrible, big, fat, awful person. We over-exaggerate our badness. We do that to ourselves. It's so tragic. What do you think, people? I've been raving on for 45 minutes. Suddenly we've got nearly our hour is finished. Oh, we've got 90 minutes today, haven't we? Okay, come on, ask me some questions now, please. I'd love to hear some questions. Any old points you'd like to bring up? Are there any in the chat box there? Teresa?
Not that I see right now.
Okay. So any more questions, people? Anybody, put your hand up and talk to me if you like. If not, it's okay. Yes, Sheila, go on.
So when you were talking about Miles Davis and hearing music,
Yeah,
where is creativity, would you say, an attachment?
that's really good. It's a great question. Let's look at it. It's very fascinating, you know. Let's look at it. Okay. Thank you so much. Okay, so okay, I have to try and be as clear as I can. In the Buddhist model of the mind, we've got these different conceptual stories. They're all conceptual, even down to attachment, anger, even the very one, even we call the emotions. They're all rooted in being conceptual stories, and the body's involved as well. So clearly, okay, attachment is so interesting. It's got so many facets to it. The grossest, the deepest energy of attachment is dissatisfaction. The next level of it is therefore hankering and hungry after something. This is the grossest level. And that's where in the first stages of Buddhist teachings, we learn to try and harness that constant emotional hunger for the cake, the body, the music, whatever. So yes, so the sound is mere sound. Shape is shape. Color is color. Form is form. You know, the objects of the senses are fairly bare bones, but aren't they? I mean, this is the point I'm getting at here. The Buddhist view is so clear. The sensory consciousnesses, not attachment, but the capacity to hear sound is just that. And what it hears is literally sound. Now, why, in my case, as soon as I hear that trumpet note, then what comes in immediately is this aspect of attachment that's based on the emotional hunger, but because I've got a connection with music, then the aspect of attachment there is the conceptual ability to over-exaggerate and to articulate in very, very fine terms, because we're intelligent, over-exaggerate the deliciousness of it. So we literally attachment, and I'm going to get to the creativity in a minute itself, but the actual attachment over-exaggerates and embellishes that bare sound. Now, you could say that sounds really good. That's called creativity. I mean, look at Picasso. What he took was simple lines, and because he was so creative, he was able to have extraordinary shapes. Or if you listen to, I always think of Charlie Parker, you know, Bird, this amazing jazz musician back in the 40s, who was a genius when it came to manipulating sound. So the one aspect of attachment at a simple technical level, not an emotional one, that is what creativity is, Sheila. It's the ability to embellish something that's very simple. So a brilliant musician can embellish sound. I mean, I think of Bach. Look at the complexity of amazing music. Bach can hear simple sound, and this genius mind, it's not just attachment that does it. You've got to have attachment. You've got to combine that with intelligence. So a person who's very intelligent can utilize that aspect of attachment, the creativity, which is literally the conceptual ability to embellish and turn something into the most amazing sounds in the universe. Are you hearing what I'm saying? So the actual function, yes, is that level of attachment. It doesn't mean, you know, so if you've got very gross attachment, if you just like, you want to just stuff food all day and jump on 14 boys and only at the grossest level of the senses, you know, that's the grosser level, how you just over-exaggerate. The concept of attachment in your mind over-exaggerates the cake and you're never satisfied. But if you've got lots, okay, we've got more than just attachment. We have kindness, we have intelligence, we have many good qualities, we have ethics. So look at Bach, in my opinion. He had good ethics, he had devotion in God, but he had this amazing creative ability, which is attachment energy. But you could argue this is where you can transform these when you combine them with virtue. And that's the Bodhisattva path, and especially the Tantric path. But if you just got only attachment, like Charlie Parker didn't only have this incredible ability, the conceptual capacity to embellish sound, which is an expression of attachment, he also had the grosser level of attachment to drugs, food, sex, all the physical ones. And that's what destroyed him. He died at 35 and people thought he was 60, you know. But look at Bach. My sense is, I'm not saying what kind of man he was, but he had more refined mind. That's the virtue. So if you're a human, you by definition have attachment mind. But if you're more ethical and you're got an ability to You know, you got a very creative ability. That's attachment. Yes, it's attachment. Creativity is attachment. It's a function of the ability to embellish something. But you mix it with intelligence, mix it with ethics, and then it's beneficial, Sheila. It doesn't make you go crazy. You hear what I'm saying? But it's the bodhisattva. So the first level of practice, there's no wriggle room. We just got to give up attachment. You calm down, not much music, not much sex, not much drugs. That's the first level. Then you begin to harness your energy, and you get some renunciation, and you work on your mind, and you subdue the grosser levels of attachment. You stop buying into the ridiculous stories of attachment. Then you're able to utilize that capacity, even on the bodhisattva path. You can utilize attachment. You can, use your skill, which is creativity, and the creativity of attachment that embellishes things, and you combine it with compassion. That's perfect way to live your life. Do you understand? Does it make sense, Sheila? Can't hear.
Yes, it's a whole different view on creativity. I have to kind of process that.
No, I understand. I think that's where this is why in tantric philosophy and psychology, as Lama Yeshe would say it's highly technical. And when we understand on a more deep level, the way these conceptual states of mind function, in the earlier stage, we hear all about attachment. It's like the grossest level, the hungry, needy level, and that embellishes the deliciousness. But when it's more, as long as if you're a bodhisattva, will choose to take a human body. So because they've got a human body, they've got conceptuality. And because they've got conceptuality, it's not gross conceptuality. It's not negative conceptuality. It's virtuous conceptuality, but including attachment energy. But they can utilize it. And this is why the whole approach from the bodhisattva path to the tantric path is so sophisticated. You can utilize that energy, because you're no longer in the thrall of it. You've gone beyond the gross level. So attachment's got a subtler way because it's conceptual. All these states of mind are conceptuality. That's what's interesting. We live at the level of conceptuality in our human life. It's very interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, fascinating.
Yeah.
Venerable, we have a couple questions in the chat.
Yeah.
So the first one is from Patricia. She says, as a new practitioner, how do I embark on this path? Do I need a guide to begin to recognize my attachments?
I understand, darling. I understand exactly. Well, I think Patricia,
yeah.
Yes, Patricia. Well, first of all, in anything, isn't it? I think we need, if you decide you like to play music, you got to, it makes sense. You do a course, that means you have a teacher. So you check up, you make sure you get the right teacher. Then you got to go on what kind of music you like. Maybe you're not sure in the beginning. So you'll narrow it down, and you might end up liking, jazz or classical, whatever. So you narrow it down as you get more involved. The same here with Buddhism. So here you are at this particular teaching, hearing these things. So then you think, oh, okay, well, how I'll learn more about this. So you go to courses. People do that. All these centers are set up, Buddhist centers are set up where they run courses in these exact things. Then, and as you go to a course, so I'd suggest you go to another course, then you listen to it, you think about it, and you gradually start to get a picture of what it's all about. And then if you keep liking it, then of course you follow your own nose, you keep doing it. And then eventually you'll connect with certain teachers, and slowly like that, So just go one step at a time, read some books, but you should, use your common sense, choose. There's lots of rubbish around, lots of people. Not being rude, you got to check on this center as well. We might be a load of rubbish as well. You check up, use your intelligence, check your sources, just like you would if you did yoga or music. You wouldn't just leap into the first center you meet. You'd check up on their reputation. Are they good center? Are there good teachers there? And you just go one step at a time, honey. And then if you keep liking it, you keep doing it. And eventually you'll meet teachers you like, and you'll develop a relationship, and you'll so you'll go from there. One step at a time, Patricia. It's very organic. Does that make sense, my dear? I hope it does. Does it make sense, Patricia?
Yes, it does. Thank you so much.
So follow your nose and follow your heart and use your intelligence and go one step at a time. And, there's plenty around, but make really good choices,
Okay.
Good,
Thank
Patricia.
you.
Thank you, sweetheart.
Thank you so much.
Great. There's more questions from Helen. Venerable, you mentioned a book in the opening regarding Mahamudra. What is the name of the book? From Wisdom.
Thank you. Yeah, Mahamudra. And then the subtitle is How to Discover Our True Nature. And it's by Lama Yeshe, published by Wisdom. Exactly. It's a wonderful book. So
Great.
Delicious. So inspiring. Yep.
The next question from Kenny is consciousness matter or something else?
That's a good point,
So
Kenny.
what is it in Buddhist psychology?
I'll explain exactly. Well, I'll give you the bullet points about what it is and what it's not. And this is the crucial point in Buddhism. If you look at the bigger picture in Buddhism, if you're just looking at how to meditate better and do this and do that, or how to look at your mind, it doesn't really matter whether you think your mind is your brain or your mind's in your toenail. I don't care, because you can hear your thoughts and you can work on them. But if you want the bigger picture, in Buddhism and the whole kind of overview of everything, then from that perspective, it's really important to understand what Buddha says the mind is. So the mind for the Buddha, the word mind or the word consciousness, these are synonymous, okay? Often in our culture, we use consciousness to mean something kind of more meaningful. They're literally synonymous. First point. Second point, in the Buddhist view, the most fundamental point in the entire Buddhist worldview is that mind is not physical. It's, in Christian teachings and Muslim teachings and Hindu teachings, all these they talk about a component that isn't physical, but they call it a soul or an atman. The Greeks call it some essence. But the Buddhist view, there's no equivalent. We have simply got mind. But the point about the mind, this is the next point, is it doesn't just refer to the grosser level. Mind is the word we use to refer to our conceptuality, our sensory consciousness. The eyeball is physical, clearly, but the part of your mind that functions through the medium of the eyeball, etc., in order to have a cognition of shape and color, that's not physical. Your eye consciousness itself. So you got conceptuality, you've got thoughts, you have feelings, you have emotions, you have rage, you have sight, you've got craving, you've got love, you've got compassion, all the positive, all the negative, the entire spectrum, unconscious, subconscious, instinct, intuition, this entire spectrum of our inner experiences. For the Buddha, that's your mind, that's your consciousness, and it is not physical. It is not a function of the physical. It's not a function of the brain. So the brain, the best way to put it, not trying to insult neuroscientists, the brain is the physical indicator, I'd put it this way, the physical indicator of what's going on in your sensory and grosser levels of your mental consciousness. Because, the Buddha asserts, and this is the point about these Indians, before the Buddha, as His Holiness said, these amazing Indians more than 3,000 years ago were the ones who began the investigation into the nature of self. And so they developed this technique that's called achieving of samadhi, concentration, at a level of subtlety of mind that we don't even posit in the materialist view of the mind. We don't posit that in neuroscience. They're discussing it. It's wonderful. The Dalai Lama and his lot, they're having these amazing discussions over the last many years exactly about what consciousness is and what it's not, and it's really good there are these discussions. People are starting to question their assumptions. But it's crystal clear in the Buddhist teachings, we have these subtler levels of mind, and those levels of cognition don't need a brain. And that's, so that's when you've got this, what they call single pointed concentration, shamatha, this state that these Indians discovered through this technique called single pointed concentration, which is one of the central techniques in Buddhism. Buddha, when he diverged in his own direction, he took this, So mind is not physical. It's the word that refers to your love, your hate, your sensory consciousness, your intellect, your clarity, your brilliance, your psychosis, you name it. That's your consciousness. That's your mind. And now the other major point about the mind, which is showing the Buddhist view, it's not the handiwork either of a creator or, shockingly, of your mummy and daddy. The mummy and daddy give us a brain, no argument there. But they don't give you your actual consciousness. The Buddhist view, and this is where reincarnation comes in, this is a major component in the entire big Buddhist view of Buddhist psychology, Buddhist philosophy, that your consciousness, your mind is think of it like a river of mental moments. And if you had perfect memory, you could track it back to the second before, yesterday, day before, and inexorably you'll get back to the first second of conception in an unbroken chain of mental moments. So then you've got to ask the question at that second, what was the second before? Well, the second before conception in your mummy's womb or her fallopian tube, basically, the egg goes back to your mother's body, the sperm goes back to your daddy's body, but your consciousness tracks it back to its own, a moment of itself. And a few weeks before that, that continuity of mind was in a previous body, and so forth and so forth and so forth. This is dealt with in vast depth, breadth and depth in the Buddhist literature. So they're the components of your mind. And the Buddha's, to the other end of it, Buddha's saying that he has found, this is the whole point in all Buddhist practice, that from his own experience, that the neuroses in our mind, the delusions, the craziness, the fears, the dramas, the misconceptions, the nonsense, which we think are normal parts of a normal person, I would suggest in our neuroscientific views and psychological views, there's no view in modern science that says you can get rid of all that stuff. But that's exactly Buddha's point. What they mean by nirvana is exactly that. You've done the job of ridding your mind of all the rubbish. That's Buddha's finding. That's his experiential finding. And this is what underpins all Buddhist practice. Then if you're on the Mahayana path, you've got a bird needs two wings, wisdom and compassion. If you've done the job of achieving your own nirvana, that's the wisdom wing. But the compassion wing, you add the compassion and the bodhicitta to the mix, and now you keep being reborn and reborn, even though you don't need to be, for the sake of benefit sentient beings. Now you become a Buddha. So mind for the Buddha is beginningless and endless, which sounds the nuttiest thing we've ever heard, but that's the Buddha's observation. So if you'd like to ask me some questions from that, you're very welcome, Kenny. That was Kenny's question, wasn't it? I can't hear you, Kenny. Unmute, Kenny. So
You're ridding yourself of the fiction and all the stories and everything else. And,
start again, Kenny. I missed the first bit of what you said. I'm so sorry.
well, it's just it's a complicated thing to think about. But
Exactly. Of course it is. Yes, exactly.
But I think it's it's ridding yourself of all the fiction.
That's right. The fictions. Exactly, Kenny. That's the job. That's the Buddhist job, putting it in modern language. That's exactly why we need concentration, why we need to learn the Buddhist model of the mind, and then learn to use that as our basis to unpack and unravel this junk in here and get rid of the junk and grow the goodness, because that's who we really are. That's Buddha's fundamental point, which is so optimistic, that it's the goodness and the wisdom and the clarity. That's what defines us. And this is indestructibly who we are. So the job is like pull out the weeds and grow the flowers, simply. That's
We're born with that, right?
We are born with it from countless past lives of habit. Yeah, exactly. But that's the job we can do. This is exactly what Buddha's saying. He's found that from his own experience, that we're capable of going to the subtlest level of our mind and unpacking and unraveling and deconstructing all these conceptual crazy stories that we're so utterly familiar with right now that we just don't even notice them. We're just there completely, we take them all as a given. So it's a quite serious job of unpacking and unraveling.
So we need space from our stories.
That's exactly right, Kenny. That's it. And that's really why the best way to do it, like my friend Venerable Renee, he gave up sex, drugs and drugs, went off to the mountains. It's the best way to do it. But you've got to do a lot of work to even get to be prepared to do that. I mean, if you can turn your back today and not care about what food you have and not worry about your friends and your mortgages and your wives and your husbands and your dogs and your babies and everything, and go and spend 8, 10, 12 hours a day, you'll get single point of concentration. Then you're really on track, honey. But that, most of us aren't going to be doing that. But it's all there. The techniques are all there to be able to do this. So
I don't know if there's a proper environment in the United States to do that.
I know, it's going to be hard to find. I know that exactly, but they're there. We're creating a little bit here and there. There are some places. A friend of mine, I'm in Santa Fe right now. Normally I'm on the road all the time the last 10, 12 years, but I got stuck, of course. I ground to a halt because I couldn't travel anywhere. But luckily I'm staying in Santa Fe. It's very pleasant. Someone's giving me a house. And just 4 hours north of here, I went up a couple of weeks ago to celebrate my birthday, actually. December 20, I'm Sagittarius. I celebrated my 76th birthday up with my friends. And there's a place called Crestone in Colorado. And everyone says it's just like Tibet. And apparently several years ago, somebody bought like 500,000 acres and they sell it off to spiritual groups. And so we had a party of about 6 of my friends who are all up there doing meditation retreats. So one of my friends is just moving into another 3-year retreat. So there are some places, Kenny. Crestone, Colorado. It's very pleasant. But, in my life, I don't think I want to do that. I want to just keep bopping and do a bit of work every day. But the thing is, that's the ideal scenario. Like anything, if you want to be like Roger Federer, you need a very precise ideal scenario. If you want to be like Bach, it's the same. You've got to sacrifice everything else. Most of us won't do it to that degree, but we can do it. We can start somewhere. And I can see. I
used to photograph the U.S. Open, and I used to photograph the U.S. Open.
Did you really? Oh, Kenny, well done.
And Federer doesn't pick up anything. Everybody picks up everything for him. So all he has to focus on is tennis.
There you go. That's it. I know.
And also, he doesn't give a shit about all the other stuff. He only gives a shit.
There you go. So the analogy there is a yogi who's working day and night on developing their mind and developing these amazing qualities and becoming an amazing person. So all the techniques are there, like with Federer. He's got the techniques. Well, Buddha's got these techniques, so it's up to us. But we can do a bit every day and we can get somewhere. And I think we can, I've been doing this job for quite a while, trying to put my money where my mouth is. you know, and I can say I'm not a great practitioner, but I'm serious. And I think I can say with certainty, I haven't got much concentration, but I've definitely lessened my anger, lessened my neuroses, and become more comfortable with myself and more confident and optimistic. And that's, you know, that's progress, isn't it? So one step at a time, Kenny.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Do you have
Cool.
time for more, Venerable Renee? I'm sorry, Venerable Robina, there's more questions in the chat.
Well, if it's past your time, but if you're happy with it, I'm happy. Oh, no, we've got a half an hour.
Oh,
Sorry.
yeah, we got till 8:30.
Go then.
Okay. So this is a question from someone who'd like to stay anonymous. That
Yes.
says, my grown son is very triggered by our political situation right now, and I can see he is filling with hate. He
Yes.
has moved to Canada, which is good for him, but he is worried about loved ones here.
I
He
understand.
gets so worked up that he can't hear anything that might help him to calm down. How do you listen in a way that doesn't cause more harm? I
Right.
recognize my anguish comes from my attachment to him.
Exactly, darling. You've hit it exactly. You've hit it on the head. And this is the point, you know, this is why the wisdom wing and the compassion wing. Compassion, and this is what you're asking about, compassion is the point. How can you deal with somebody else's trauma and suffering without going crazy yourself? That's really what the compassion wing is. How can you work in these hospitals and not be completely dragged down to despair at what you see? This is the compassion wing. But as His Holiness says, compassion isn't enough. And that means we've got to do the wisdom wing, which is exactly what I'm talking about, this whole work. And you understand it by your words. It's very clear. So the extent to which we can be compassionate and can see someone else's rage or despair or craziness and not lose the plot and not get dragged down by it is dependent on the level of work we've done in our own mind. And my sense is the question you already asked implies you're doing that work. So, you know, you're already able, you can hear him, you can see the suffering he's causing himself. So you've just got to be like a rock of Gibraltar to love the man for who he is, not get caught up in his stories, try not to get distressed, but just by giving him, just by loving him, if you could give him advice, I mean, God, go for it. But you know perfectly well he can't hear advice. And this is what we often have a tendency to do. And that's often our attachment. We want to leap in and make it all perfect and make the problem all go away. We can't do that. You can't get a person advice if they don't want to hear it. So then just have to learn to want to just love him and hope. If you do practice, you try to do what you can, but just love him for who he is. Love him for who he is and just console him and give him affection. And that he won't forget. You know, no point that he won't forget, and he knows that you're there for him, and you just hope that he can turn to you when he does want advice. Just love him for who he is, be a rock of Gibraltar, and don't buy into his stories and attempt not to show anyway your own distress. Because as soon as you start panicking, we all drown together. You can't help anybody. That's why the wisdom wing is so important. The inner work we do is so important. And that's our own personal work to get our mind prepared so we know our own anger and our own attachment and our own fears. And then we don't have those polluting our compassion. We get more clarity, more wisdom, more stability. And that really is the way that's how you can navigate your life without going crazy. You know, I hope that helps. It's a totally understandable point. And this is a variation of everybody's life. There's always going to be, whether it's a person who's suffering from some physical pain, whether it's this kind of thing, we just got to have the wisdom to be clear, be there, don't buy into it, don't try to make it better, don't try to solve their problem, don't buy into their story, just love them for who they are and see how they're causing themselves such unbelievable suffering and have such compassion, you know. And of course, if you have confidence in your own practice and you might have faith in the Buddhas and all the teachings and the practices and the methods, and maybe you do medicine Buddha, maybe you have prayers and practices and pujas done, that's up to where you're at with your practice. You know, there's lots of other things you can do to help. But this is life, isn't it? Everywhere we turn, we're going to see suffering. And our ability to be stable in the face of it, that's the wisdom wing work. That brings our own contentment and our own strength. Otherwise, we will be dragged down to hell with everybody else. And this is the nightmare. Such a good point. Thank you.
Thank you. Lee has raised her hand. Would you like to unmute Lee?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Venerable.
Good.
I know that you touched on so many things in the mind, but one word that comes to me, which I think about a lot, is intelligence, where intelligence comes in. Because, you know, being New Yorkers, we all tend to think that most of us here are of a certain intelligence, you know.
Yes.
And I know in my own personal work of trying to be compassionate is usually when I meet somebody who who I believe is less intelligent. You know, I've got this intelligence thing going of how I assess people, are they intelligent or not? And yet, you know, the Dalai Lama, he's highly intelligent. I mean, you could not have written the Lam Rim if Tsongkhapa was not
That's right.
highly intelligent. So
Exactly. So then question,
just, well,
how does that fit into all this?
yeah, does it fit
Okay.
at all? Or
Let's
it
talk about
has
it.
nothing to do with enlightenment?
It's a good point, Lee. It's a good point. So it's very interesting, I think, in our culture. I think it's a really good point. So there we go. Buddhism's talking about the wisdom wing and the compassion wing. So the word wisdom, it sounds like a noble word, but all wisdom means in Buddhist terms is being in touch with reality, being accurate, being accurate. That's what wisdom means. So if you know that 1 + 1 is 2, that's wisdom, honey. But if you know emptiness, that's wisdom too. But if you know physics, that's also wisdom. But what's very interesting in our approach, in the Buddhist approach, wisdom, meaning being clear, the degree to which we're caught up in anger, attachment, jealousy, fears, dramas, is the extent to which we're not wise. We're not being intelligent. And that's really, if you take the extreme, the way that the world is now, I find it so fascinating, this level of conspiracy theories that are floating around the world. That is the extreme example of what Buddhism would refer to as literally as the grossest, most primordial ignorance of literally believing in complete fantasies. You see, but even if we look at the milder level of attachment and anger, when I'm angry with somebody, that anger is exaggerating the ugliness of the person. That doesn't mean Mr. Trump forget Mr. Trump. I'm not trying to be personal. My boyfriend, let's say he cheated on me. This is the point about wisdom now. Let's say he did cheat. That's a fact that no one can deny. But if my anger is really strong, because of my attachment being really strong, then I will see him as the worst monster in the planet. Well, that's plainly an exaggeration. So all the delusions literally blind us from seeing reality as it is. And that, if you keep being this way, that ends up being these maniac conspiracy theories. So that's the summary of a completely unintelligent person. But Buddha says we've all got that to some degree, according to how much attachment, how much jealousy, how much anger. Those emotional afflictions are rooted in being misconceptions. So the degree to which we've got this is the degree to which we don't have intelligence. But this is what's interesting, Lee. In our culture, so in other words, if you're practicing Buddhism, you're getting this wisdom and you're rooting it in ethics. You can't separate them. And eventually when you get happiness, you've got wisdom and ethics. If you've got happiness, it comes from giving up harming others, and it comes from giving up fantasy nonsense. So that's what brings joy and happiness and intelligence. That's real wisdom. Now, in our culture, you could be the best physicist on the planet, Lee, we know that. You could have the most genius intellect, but you'd still come home and beat up your husband and get paranoid. So that just shows our intelligence is only intellectual intelligence. But the intelligence we're talking about here is emotional intelligence linked to ethics, and it's linked to ethics and therefore brings happiness. They all come together. You get my point?
Thank you. Yes. Thank you. That was exactly what I was.
Good. It's a really important point. And that's our point in the West. We don't link philosophy and science and intelligence with ethics. You could still be an unethical maniac and still be the best artist. And that's why often, I always remember that wonderful movie Russell Crowe was in, The Beautiful Mind. I'm not criticizing anybody, but there he was, this genius. But we think because he was so genius, he was an insane person. So we almost like, oh, the poor thing, he must be so intelligent, he's become insane. That's not intelligence, that's out of control mind, because he's got attachment and aversion and he doesn't know how to work with it. So you can't separate the intellectual intelligence from the emotional in the Buddhist view. You've got to have both, otherwise you're not a whole person. It's a very interesting point, isn't it? Yeah, thank you very much, Lee. What else, people?
Great. So another anonymous question, that you mentioned transforming an attachment through tantric practices.
Yeah.
The question is, what is the best route to find a qualified teacher to get initiated in those practices?
I understand. Yeah. Well, I'd say the answer to that question is that, because Tantra is like the most advanced level of Buddhist philosophy, psychology, and metaphysics, the most advanced, then very well to do anything advanced, you've got to do the earlier stuff first. So if you're on this Tibetan Buddhist path and you're at the first stages of practice where you learn to control your body, control your speech, live in ethics, and then you go to the next level of practice and you literally give up attachment. You get to see what attachment is. You understand this exaggerated conceptual elaboration story. You understand all the delusions, and this is the major work of being a Buddhist. Then you get renunciation. Then you're able to go to the compassion wing, and now you get bodhicitta, and then you're able to get some realization of emptiness. So you have reasonable, so these are all the stages, and then you're qualified to go to the next stage and take the empowerments into the practices. Because even at each stage as you go, you are able, by understanding attachment, by understanding aversion, by understanding jealousy, even as you go along on the path, they let more and more don't run you, and you more and more understand them, so you can more and more utilize them. Even on, like I said about Bach, music, even on the compassion level, forget Tantra. If you've got subdued body, speech, and mind, and you've still got a human mind, and you've got conceptuality, you're able to utilize the capacity of attachment, which is what exaggerates the sound. So you can make beautiful music based on compassion, or even the simple level. You're a genius mathematician, but which is, and you can, oh no, you're an artist, and you can be totally attached to your art, but you do it for the sake of others. That's how you're transforming your attachment. So it's not even a fancy high evolved level. That's the most sophisticated level, Tantra, but you've got to start at the earlier levels. And if you can, or even anger, let's say you're a parent, and your child needs discipline, and you are truly coming from compassion, then you utilize anger by looking like you're angry. You go to your room, I told you this, but you're not being angry. That's using anger to benefit sentient beings. So this is the simple level in day-to-day life we can use it. Don't think of it as something too high, one step at a time. When you have understanding of your own mind, and you've unpacked and unraveled your own mind, you're no longer driven by attachment, you're no longer driven by anger, then you can be wise and skillful, even on the bodhisattva path, and skillfully utilize attachment and utilize anger. Then we can go to the next level. And the teachers in Tibetan Buddhism who teach Tantra, they teach junior school, high school, and university as well, because that's like postgraduate. So the same teacher will teach you everything. So, you start on the Tibetan Buddhist path and you go one step at a time. And you meet the teachers, and eventually, when we're ready, we then take the empowerments into these practices. But as Lama Zopa says, don't think you're going to actually do the job of utilizing properly, because that's a highly evolved person. The only person who can do at the level, the most high level of actually accomplishing that, is a person who's actually got renunciation, actually has realized emptiness, and actually has bodhicitta, which is such a highly evolved person that it's unbelievable. So we just simply have to fake it till we make it. And as Lama Zopa says, if we do take an empowerment, like for green Tara or something, you don't even pretend you're going to get realizations, but what you're doing is you're programming your mind with those practices, so that next life, you also eventually will be able to accomplish them. That's my answer to you. I hope that's helpful.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. There's one more that's come through. This question says, can one be attached to health and this life? Like if one is afraid of being sick and dying?
Of course it is. The reason we suffer is because of attachment. I mean, Lama Zopa's book, How to Face Death Without Fear, that it was published earlier as another title and has now come out, I think, this year. So unbelievably helpful. That the main reason we have fear of death, for example, or of sickness for that matter, is because of his unbelievable attachment to oneself, to the body. And that's what drives, and the Buddha's view of attachment is so subtle. We should really not be depressed by this. It just goes to a very deep level. We're driven by attachment every second. The things the Buddha's saying, if we're not becoming conscious, everything we do, eat, sleep, go to the toilet, have sex, have houses, have boyfriends, have girlfriends, have jobs, that the underlying thing that drives all of it is attachment. But if you've got love and compassion in the mix, then that's what calms it down. That's what modifies it. We've all got attachment until we're highly realized beings. It's a much more subtle state of mind than we would imagine, Of course, attachment drives everything we do. But that's why we've got to start to become in charge of it, and then add compassion and love and kindness to the mix. And that's what mitigates it. So of course it's attachment, sweetheart. And it's fear of losing. One of the functions of attachment is to grasp onto something, and not one of the functions of attachment is to hanker after something, and then when we get it, to exaggerate its deliciousness, and then when we get it, is to be afraid of losing it, so we cling to it. And that's why we're so afraid of death, terrified of death, because of this. We can't stand the thought of not being me, So we've got to learn to recognize everything's impermanent. And so meanwhile, you don't chuck the baby out with the bathwater and stop eating. That would be silly. we do need to eat until we're a highly evolved person. So we try to do it with kindness, with compassion, with a reasonable attitude, you know. So you lessen the attachment and the fears. I hope that makes sense. What else? Sweethearts. Nothing more, Teresa?
Just gonna say something
Yeah, Kenny, and then Andy's got a point too. After in a second, Andy. So go, Kenny.
in reference to A Beautiful Mind. There was a scene in it I always thought was interesting where
Yeah, tell me.
he wins the award and he doesn't think it's real. His problem is he can't tell what's real and not. So he asked one of his students, "Is this guy really here?"
There you go. There you go. See, that really, so that's a fascinating point. The point that I was making, that in our culture, we don't know why he's got these paranoid, weird views, but we just admire his brilliant intelligence. And we almost think the more intelligent you are, the more likely you are to lose the plot, which is kind of weird, isn't it? But I know that's an interesting point. And that was a great movie. It was a really fascinating movie, wasn't it? I
I
loved
just remember that scene. It was
Yeah,
pretty.
there you go. That's very interesting, Kenny. What was your point, Andy? Thank you. Yeah, there you go.
Hi.
I can hear you. Good.
How do we navigate this? I mean, I know it's a shape, I know it's a sound, but there is also, I'm speaking of people like Trump, or could be
Yeah, sure.
Hitler or someone,
Sure,
to
sure.
I mean, we recognize we're making that person into what we make them.
Sure. But there's still
how do
objective
we
reality,
navigate-
Andy. Yeah.
But how do we navigate?
No, that's exactly the point.
Yeah.
I understand. So this is where the wisdom comes in. This is where intelligence comes in, Andy. So if we've got this view that we can distinguish between attachment, which over exaggerates somebody's deliciousness, and then anger, which over exaggerates their badness, they're the neurotic things that we add on top of our intelligence. So if you're in, let's just say, Mr. Trump, or whoever it is, let's just don't even think of this, whoever a person is that you think is doing harm, could be your next door neighbor, for God's sake. If you can see the fact that they're kicking the dog, that's a fact, Andy. That's not delusion, that's a fact. But if you've got lots of anger, you'll make a mess of it, because the anger will jump on top of the facts, and then you'll punch the guy and go crazy. But if you remove the anger, you'll actually see it more clearly, and then you'll use more intelligence with that, because you haven't lost the plot, and you'll know what to do to be of benefit. So that Dalai Lama said one time, when one journalist said, he said, anger seems really helpful. And we can see in political activity, it does seem to drive, it gives us energy. And Dalai Lama said, I know what you mean. But he said, if it's mainly anger that drives you, then it won't last, you'll give up. But if you're driven by compassion, which implies also intelligence, because you can see there is suffering out there, but you're not going crazy because of it. So the difference is anger, we assume that anger is equal to the truth. No, anger is an exaggeration of the truth, but then we start to tell facts from fiction. You get the anger away, you're going to see facts. I mean, Martin Luther King, I love this. He said, it is good to find fault. Think of this is more intelligent. Finding fault goes, my God, look at that racism. Look at that sexism. Look at that suffering out there. That's not anger, Andy. That's fact. But we assume that it has to come with, how dare they do this? I'm going to kill them. And that's what makes the mess. So we think if you give up anger, you chuck the baby out with the bathwater and you become passive. No, as this is what Martin Luther King said. It's good to find fault. It's good to see the world the way it is. But then you say, what can I do to help? That's compassion, Andy. And that's what the Dalai Lama is saying. So compassion is actually action. But when we hear giving up anger, because we exaggerate the role of anger, we think it's anger that makes you see the problem. No, that's intelligence that makes you see the problem. Anger just distorts it and makes a mess of you. And then you end up making a mess and not helping. Do you see what I'm saying? And that's the Buddhist view, that the delusions are so separate. They've got this absurd over exaggerating, and that's the stuff that makes a mess. And that's why we lose control and go crazy. And then when the anger goes, you end up not caring. So if we have to cultivate the wisdom, clarity, there is suffering, there is craziness, there is delusion. These are facts. But we just assume you have to have anger. No, have compassion instead. It's more powerful. And then you won't give up. You'll want to help. And that means you won't lose the plot. And that's even the same as just helping your friend who's sick, help the woman helping her son. If she gets angry or upset about it, that'll just mess the whole thing. So this is the clear approach in Buddhism. He makes this massive distinction between these neurotic emotions and how they distort everything and make a mess. And distinguish between those and the reasonableness and the intelligence and the compassion. Then you're clear and you can navigate things and you won't lose the plot yourself and you will be able to help. And if you can't change much, you'll just keep going and do what you can, one step at a time. Does that make sense, Andy? Yeah. This is a tough job, because we just take all these states of mind for granted. And in our culture, we think we don't really see we have a different definition of anger. We have a different definition. We mix it with compassion. Usually the compassion we have now is you see the guy kick the dog, you have compassion for the dog, and then to that amount, you then have anger for the person. That's what makes the mess. So the guy did kick the dog. Well, do something to get the dog away. And then even the Buddhist view, even more long term, you'd even be able to have compassion for the guy, because the Buddhist view is everything we think and do and say produces our own experiences. So the guy's just going to make a mess of himself. And if you really have compassion, you'll know that Mr. Trump's harming himself. All these crazy people are harming themselves. But that's a hard one to have because we just want to punch them in the nose. You understand? We're communicating?
Yes.
And good. Thank you so much. So it's a lot of inner work that's needed to get the clarity to distinguish between the facts and the fiction. That's the way to put it. That's the real job of using Buddhist psychology. And we don't often know that, even if we're Buddhists. We just think it's all about being mindful and kind of holy and nice, and it's very cliched. And action, compassion action can be very powerful. It doesn't have to be all soft and gooey, When you got compassion, you really be fierce. I mean, this is why I love the Martin Luther King example. I know when I was an old radical lefty political activist back in the 70s and the 60s, I remember I thought, usually my arrogance, I thought, oh, Martin Luther King is such a weak person. I prefer Malcolm X, But in the end, it's kind of ironic. I've just read a memoir of somebody who said basically, finally, Malcolm and Martin Luther King kind of virtually came to the same points almost at their death. Malcolm came from one side and Martin Luther King from another. But the difference you can see there, even with Malcolm X, he did have anger, but he had kind of a clarity about it. He was so shocking. I mean, poor white America just could not handle Malcolm X's words because they were so blunt and actually they were so accurate. And when you analyze his words, he wasn't just being violent. He wasn't paranoid. He wasn't delusional. He wasn't a conspiracy theorist. He had facts. He was moral. He was ethical, but he had this fierce ability to speak the truth. But people thought he was angry. Do you understand what I'm saying, Andy? It's very interesting. Not being angry doesn't mean you're weak. Oh my goodness. You see what I'm saying, Andy? It's a very interesting point. I find that very fascinating. I mean, Martin Luther King was more soft in what he said. So he didn't freak people out so much, although he did, of course. He got arrested all the time. But Malcolm X just so spoke the truth. And if you analyze his words, there's really accuracy in his words. It's just too hard for people to hear it, So they thought he was, and this is the point, Andy, I find, and everybody, Lee as well, when you're really angry, you become literally delusional. And that's what conspiracy theories end up being. Your mind's so out of control, you lose your mind. That means you lose all common sense and you've lost your intelligence because anger exaggerates. And that's what conspiracy theories get to. They really believe that the Satanists are running the country. I mean, that's how insane anger is. That's called anger, Andy. That's what anger is. When you go completely crazy, you rant and you rave and you've lost all common sense. Whereas, Malcolm X never lost his common sense. He was incredible. He was clear. He was focused. He was ethical. He was not losing his common sense. So then you could argue he wasn't being angry. It's a very interesting point, actually. Are you seeing my point? I mean, I use that example because that was so powerful for me in those days when I was a political activist. And I love Malcolm X. So anger is way more than we think. It's delusional. That's why people go mad. People go mad. And they just believe conspiracies everywhere around them. That's what makes us lose our mind and that's what paranoia is. You can't control the anger. I mean, it's a serious, serious mental illness. We just think it's normal. I mean, it's so shocking in our culture. Are we communicating, people? It's kind of interesting. Yeah. What else is there? That's it. 8:28, time to go home.
Should I save? There is another question that came through.
Let's hear it. Yeah.
Okay. It says, can we really practice compassion without attachment if we have not realized emptiness?
Oh, darling, of course we can. It's incremental. It's incremental, sweetheart. You can't wait till you're perfect before you. It's sort of like saying I can only ride a bike when I can ride a bike perfectly. No, it's kind of ridiculous. You've got to start riding a bike now, and you learn less attachment, more compassion, and you just keep moving one little baby step at a time. Absolutely, with certainty. Of course, simple. It's gradual, sweetheart. It's gradual. Go one step at a time and delight in whatever level of compassion we've got, and delight in whatever level of attachment we've not got. One step at a time, and be happy with our progress. It's a good point to end on. Well, thank you all, you people. So nice to all talk to you. So glad. I might see you again. When am I on next, Teresa?
Yes, thank you so much, Venerable. So next you'll be on tomorrow. We have you Wednesday from 7 to 9 p.m. with our Discovering Buddhism course on daily practice. And then on Thursday in the afternoon from 3 to 4:30.
What's the topic there?
On Thursday, the topic is free yourself from fear. And then we go into Friday evening talk on samsara and nirvana, and then a whole weekend on samsara and nirvana.
Okay, so samsara and nirvana is really more of this is really what we're discussing here. Learning to understand the delusions, distinguishing them from the virtues, and understanding how we can navigate all of this in order to really become these marvelous people that Buddha says we can become. We'll go into more detail because we have more time. Okay, good people.
Thank you
so
so much.
I'll just sing a little prayer it's the thought that made compassion grow and grow in the hearts of all. Jangchub semchog rinpoche ma ke panam ke gyuchig ke panyampa me payang gong ne gong du sho. Okay, thank you, my dears. So kind. Thanks for all your wonderful questions. Questions are so helpful, I tell you. It opens up the whole topic. Thank you.
Thanks.
Love to you. Good night in New York.
Thank you. Thank you, Venerable.